You're not going to be able to stop.
Hello, it's John Heaton here, and this is a rather special video because we are in England at the moment. In fact, we are somewhere in England, and I'm with my friend Dave Costello, special guest. Hello. And he asked if we could review this album, and also Andy Brooks wanted me to review this album, so I think it's about time. Seeing as we are somewhere in England, in Bristol actually, we're going to review this album. And before we do that, we're going to take you through a little bit of the background of this album. Over to you, Dave.
Well, yeah, 1980, we were saying the Beatles couldn't do beginnings of decades very well, and 1980 seemed like a real low point for all of them. We had January 1980, Paul was busted. May 1980, Ringo was nearly in a fatal road accident. And then November, we know what happened in December 1980, but in November 1980, George suffered the indignity of being the first Beatle to have an album rejected by the record label.
Which was this album here. We have the CD version of it, which was actually the same album as this one, but with the original cover. It had a different track listing. It had 4 tracks which didn't make the finished album, and 4 tracks which got dropped. And I don't know, how do you want to do this? Should we go through the album as it is, or should we try and remember the track listing of the original?
Well, try and remember the original album that George delivered first of all, I reckon.
Okay.
So November, he delivered the album, and it was rejected for being too laid back. So which Warner Brothers executive decided that, I don't know. But what we would have had, the original Somewhere in England, would have been, in my opinion, a fantastic album. And it had these legendary 4 missing tracks, Flying Hour, Lay His Head, Sat Singing, and Tears of the World, which were kind of holy grail material for Beatles and George fans. And there's quite a few people on various chat rooms and things. They say that these tracks have been a bit like forbidden fruit, really, that they've been overestimated, their value has been overestimated. But I think because they were rare, but I think objectively, when you listen to these 4 songs, they were superb songs, and pretty much superior to the tracks that replaced them.
Yeah, not completely, but I won't agree with that completely, but I will say that, to this day, there's 4 tracks, 3 of them are not even released, have been released on CD, which is ridiculous. I don't know who to hold responsible within George's estate, but it's a travesty, and the only one which has been released was a bonus track on 33 1/3, which makes no sense at all. That was the track Tears of the World. So we have at least 2 classics out there, Lay His Head and Flying Hour, which particularly Flying Hour reminds me of George Harrison albums. It's got some very Steve Winwood-esque keyboards. In fact,
very
it sounds
much
like
Loves
it
Comes
might
to
even have been an
Everyone.
outtake.
Yeah.
And Lay His Head is brilliant, and that was actually released on vinyl as an extra track on the B-side of the 12-inch of Got My Mind Set on You,
Right.
but on CD not released. So whoever's out there, put them out.
And the original album, it had a coherency to it. The what we ended up with was a bit fractured, I think. But the original album started out with Hong Kong Blues. It had a gong at the beginning, and what a perfect theatrical opener to the album that would have been.
Yeah. Because I think Hong Kong Blues is rather lost on side 2 of the finished album.
It doesn't make much sense, no.
But I think the second track on the original album and on the finished album is Unconsciousness Rules, which I think we're both in agreement is not a brilliant track. George trying to be upbeat, catchy, doesn't really work. Should have dropped this one, really, do you think? Yeah. Okay. So we move on to Life Itself, which I'm not sure if that was on the original album.
We're actually on the...
Well, I know Life Itself was on the original album, so we can talk about it, and it's a great track.
Okay.
I think. It's...
Yeah, Life Itself, it's got that lovely chorusy guitar warm effect that George Harrison was pervaded by. Lovely devotional song. Classic George. It's highly rated by George fans.
And then continuing on from what was on the original album, the other cover of Hoagy Carmichael, Baltimore Oriole, which I know you rate pretty highly.
I love it. It's you know, George was obsessed in this era with those 1930s classic songwriters, and I think he's put so much care and attention into the arrangement. I think you don't like his vocals much, do you? But
they're a bit
on this
thin,
track, I think he sings it superbly, and it's got a fantastic saxophone solo, Tom Scott,
probably,
which goes on for several minutes. Really, I think it's a lovely song, wonderful song.
Okay, no, I don't dislike it. Don't get me wrong. 2 more tracks on the original album. The Writings on the Wall, just a classic, and I think you agree with that. And we were just talking the lyrics, which have, you know, your friends, or you'll lose your friends, are all drunk away or shot away or die away from you. And obviously, when I first heard that song, I thought the shot away related to John, but then I realised this song was on the original album,
Which was released a month before.
recorded at least a month before John died. So maybe he changed that lyric, or maybe he was referring to Mal Evans, you think?
Well, that was another one of George's friends who was shot
By the police.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it opens up some questions. Like, did George change the lyrics on the June '81 release, the final release, or was it, you know, spookily prophetic?
Yeah, we need to get a demo of the original version.
But it's a great song. Writings on the Wall. It's up there it's one of the best.
Classic.
One of the best songs on.
Lyrically very strong as well, very moving. And then Save the World is the other track, which was on the original album, which is pretty decent. He also did an alternative version of this for the Greenpeace album, which I think is, if anything, slightly better. But again, very, very nice, meaningful words, nice bouncy tune.
Yeah, George was ahead of the game, ahead of the curve in talking about ecological issues, and also about the other thing that pervades this album is about the greed of big corporations, polluting up the world from here to the moon, and there's a lot of righteous anger that he was expressing on this album, which was way ahead of what other people were talking about at the time.
Yeah, we've got to save the whale. Greenpeace, they've tried to defuse it, but dog food salesmen insist unkindly to harpoon it. That's a good lyric.
Yeah. And so the songs that replaced the original album, so should we go on to the new album,
Yeah.
the official release? So the covers were very different.
Very different.
This was designed by Ray Cooper, and
As was this.
was it?
I think so, yeah.
So the album cover, pretty mediocre cover really, but your idea was that any street in England with the yellow line could be anywhere in England really.
It's very clever because the back cover shows he's actually in the Tate Gallery in London.
Have you ever been to see this?
I've meant to go and see it for the last 30 years, but I never got round to
I
it.
wonder if it's still there.
I'm not sure if Holland Park Avenue Study by Mark, whatever his name is,
Well remembered.
well
remembered.
is still there. But if you ever are in the Tate Gallery in London, check it out and drop us a line and tell us this is still there. So the first track which he replaced the old tracks was Blood from a Clone, which was a real dig at the record business.
Which maybe they were too thick to appreciate. They just heard the fact that the song was upbeat, and he says it in the first 2 lines. They say they like it, but now in the market it may not go well as it's too laid back. And that's what the original album, the main crime was. It was too laid back.
You need some papa, nothing like Frank Zappa.
And not new wave. They don't play that crap. So
Okay.
George was a victim of the era. In '81 we were moving from punk into new wave and power pop, and he just wasn't coming up with the goods in that small time frame.
Yeah.
Of course, posterity shows something totally different. So Blood from a Clone, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. It's not a bad track. It's not a disaster. It's just nothing great. The next track to replace the old ones was All Those Years Ago, which is a tribute to John and featured Paul, Linda and Denny as well as Ringo on it, and it's a strangely upbeat tune for such a sad lyric, but very heartfelt, and was actually more or less George's last top 20
Number
single
13
before
in the
Got My
UK.
Mind Set on You anyway. Was it number 13? Yeah, about that.
Yeah, number 2 I think in America.
Yeah, well remembered. Yeah, good
And
track.
And it put the record straight in some ways as well, because so it's the legend has it is that John Lennon was very upset that George never mentioned him in his autobiography, I Me Mine, and so George puts the record straight here, says, you know, how much, you know.
And he'd actually
He looked up to
recorded
John.
the first version before John died, and he was actually going to give it to Ringo. This video could go on forever. So Ringo ended up not recording it, and I think George changed a few lyrics after John's death to reflect how sad it all was. But anyway, decent song.
Yeah, good to have George in the charts.
Indeed, yeah. So the next track added was Teardrops, which is a kind of bouncy, catchy little number. I think this was released as a single but didn't do anything. A bit too heavy on the synthesizer, we think.
Not one of my favourites. A bit relentless, I think.
Yeah, and the lyrics are pretty mundane, really. But then That Which I Have Lost is a great addition. This is one of my favourite tracks, and a really nice guitar solo in the middle, back to the guitar, which again Dave said pervaded the previous album.
Great rhythms, great
Tune.
backing, his own backing vocals,
Yeah.
the echo vocals.
Yeah.
It's a really strong song.
I think this is my second favourite after Writings on the Wall, actually,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
What else have we got? Then that's it.
Have we covered all the songs?
Yeah, those were the 4 tracks missing.
Right. So what about the album as a whole then?
Well, as you
So
said,
what was
Dave, a little
released?
bit disjointed, the way it finally came out, and therefore I don't think we can give this more than a 7.5.
Yeah, I'd say a 7. Being contentious, I would have
Yeah,
given
would
the
have given
original
this one
album a 9. I would have thought it was a worthy successor to George Harrison. It would have been a classic George album.
Okay,
and
I'll go slightly lower. I think the original album maybe 8.5, and this one sort of 7.5. So,
Well, yeah.
but then George Harrison set such a high standard that
What
I
was
don't
that, a
think.
10?
Yeah, easily. Yeah, I don't think he could ever match that.
And you can make your mind up by going onto YouTube and seeking out somewhere in England the true version, because that has the original running order, and you can make your own mind up about whether it was a classic album or not. It would have been a classic album. Let's
Yeah.
hope it gets re-released.
Yeah, Donnie, if you're watching, put it out. Put out a box set with every single demo ever. Don't put them out 10 at a time, please. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.